Well, hi everybody, and welcome to NUWorkWell. We are so thrilled today to have Dr. Alyssa Westring and thrilled to try a new medium. So just to give you a little bit of background about us and the podcast, this is a podcast about work, life at graduate school in a moment where integrating work and life is facing new challenges every day. But we would love to tell you a little bit about, again, us as hosts. I'm Elise Lanjati. I'm a career advisor for PhD students at Northwestern University. And Leslie.
And I'm Leslie Lundeen. I am the Wellbeing Manager at Northwestern University. And we are so delighted to have Alyssa Westring back. A little bit about her. She's an Associate Professor of Management at the Driehaus College of Business in DePaul University, not far from us. She's an award-winning educator and NIH-funded researcher, and she shares her expertise on leadership, work-life integration, and women's careers in leading academic and popular outlets. So you may have seen her name before, and is a frequent speaker at Fortune 500 companies. We were fortunate enough to have her as our featured guest as part of our Navigating Teaching Scholarship and Life series a few years back for graduate students. So some of you in the audience may remember that. And during that talk, Alyssa was able to share a little bit more about her personal journey towards work-life integration from graduate school through her professorship and about her 2 school-age children and living in Chicago. But today, what we wanted to talk about is a fantastic book that she has co-authored and which recently came out, I think March 2020, so just as the pandemic hit, yes, which is called Parents Who Lead, the leadership approach you need to parent with purpose, fuel your career, and create a richer life.
So just before we jump into the interview, a quick note for those of you who are able to join us live today. Thank you. We're really excited. Please feel free to use the chat box, the comment box, ask any questions. We're hoping to have a bit of Q&A as we go with Alyssa. And with that, we will jump in. So I mentioned this before when we chatted offline, really loved the book as a non-parent reader.
Thank you. That's always good to hear.
But I guess the first place that we wanted to start was to kind of understand a little bit better what you mean by the title, Parents Who Lead, and within this context, how you define leadership.
Sure. So we take a really sort of broad approach to what it means to be a leader. And basically, a leader is just somebody who moves themselves and others towards a better future. So, a traditional idea of a leader in an organization is somebody who has formally assigned subordinates. But that's kind of an old-fashioned definition of leadership. And we like to think of anybody can be a leader as long as they have an idea of how to make things better and they mobilize people towards that future. So really, parenting as we say, is the ultimate leadership challenge, because you're taking these sort of unformed blobs of humans and leading them towards being hopefully, kind, thoughtful, well-rounded adults and citizens. And then you're doing that in the context of your own life as a parent, trying to be a leader in your workplace, in your community, and of yourself as well.
Yeah, and as you talk about that, I was thinking how the pandemic, I think, has really brought that to the forefront. So many parents are trying to lead and to be able to convey their idea of what a good life is to their kids in ways that they haven't had to before as educators, as providing mental health support and all of that. And yet we know, because the pandemic has also revealed a lot about the very real structural and societal barriers that caregivers and really everyone faces. So I know that you do actually acknowledge that in the book, but also try to focus on the agency that caregivers possess in these individual situations, right? So can you talk more about the ways that caregivers, and really just every one of us, can challenge the assumptions that we might be bringing about ourselves and our personal and professional relationships to being able to thrive in our lives and be leaders in every sector?
Right. So I come to this from a personal perspective as well, right? I'm supposedly an expert in this. And I always come with this idea or this tendency to think that if I just think about it in the right way or try the right strategy, that I'll be able to get it right. And the reality is, not only during a pandemic, but in regular times, there's significant structural barriers that make this really hard to do. Right? In the workplace, there's lack of flexibility, there's policies, there's practices, there's even norms of what it means to be a good worker that we're up against. In the family domain, and the school systems only provide so much support. Obviously, right now, school systems may be entirely virtual. So this idea that you are the only thing that's preventing you from having perfect work-life balance is just a lie. And I think it's something we tell ourselves maybe to feel a greater sense of control, but it's not that helpful. On the other hand, there are some things we can do as parents and as leaders to make things better. But whenever I talk to people about those things, I always want to put that in the caveat that we exist within this reality that I want my kids to go back to school. I am not in control of that, right? I don't get to have control over that. So I can only do things within the bounds of the situation that I exist in. And frankly, for those of us who are able to work remotely, able to continue on in our careers and our education, we're already among the most fortunate people in society. So, people who are losing their jobs, or who have no access to childcare, that's a tricky situation. So let's, acknowledge where we're lucky too.
Absolutely. I think the idea of kind of this lack of agency and this lack of control is something that we're seeing in every every part of our lives right now.
For sure.
Yeah, and something in the book that you spoke to that really was helpful for me as I was kind of framing how to go day to day, week to week right now is this idea of a four-way view. So the family, the self, the career, and the community being these different spaces of your life. And I love it, particularly given this context of this lack of control. If you can speak to, how those in higher education, whether it's our graduate students, our postdocs, faculty, staff, can really leverage that model right now.
Right. So the idea of the four-way view broadly is that you need to have a snapshot of where you are right now in order to come up with better and more creative solutions for where you want to go. Because if the answers were obvious about how to make things better, you probably would have done them already, right? If I'm talking to Northwestern faculty, staff, and students, these are smart, motivated people. The answers are not straightforward, or else you would have done it. You're not just too lazy to figure it out. So what you have to start doing then instead is looking for hidden clues and creative solutions that might not be obvious. And so we find that the four-way view is just a really useful tool to help people do that. So I think of life in sort of, if you think of four main buckets that you mentioned, but you've got the work, which for graduate students would include, education, career goals, all of the sort of school to work bucket. Then you've got family, which is, certainly kids if you're a parent, but also many of us are dealing with our own parents, relatives, siblings. That's a whole new issue that the pandemic has brought up for us. Even pets, my pet, could be part of that bucket. We have the community domain, which is, people sometimes get a little bit confused about what community means. I think we all have a heightened sense of awareness of community right now because it's so salient, especially when we can't connect with it in the ways that we're used to. But it's friends, neighbors, childcare providers, educators, community, political organizations, religious groups, all of that stuff. And then the last is the self domain, which is sort of your internal world, your mind, your body, your spirit. So if you think of life in those four buckets, then the questions that you might start asking yourself are, how important are each of these buckets to me? How much of my attention and energy am I devoting to each of them? And how satisfied do I feel? Do I feel good? Are things going well? Are they not going well? And then you can start to look at how things are aligning between those four domains. So for instance, if you realize, my family is really important to me, but it only gets 10% of my attention because I'm focusing on my school and career all the time, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should drop your school and career and reallocate all the attention, but it might suggest, okay, well, what are creative ways that I could connect more with my family that don't impinge on my work role, don't impinge on my career, because we want to find ways to have wins across multiple domains. right? So you don't want to do something that improves your family life, but really hurts your career goals. So I can just give an example of like, I was feeling at the start of this pandemic, like my dad is a widower, he's living alone, I'm worried about him, but constantly talking to him every day and being his primary social support was not working for me for a number of reasons. So we figured out that my daughter could FaceTime him and read books to him for school. So I'm kind of ticking the family box. My daughter is reading to him, so he feels connected to her. Also, that takes away a half an hour where I like listening to her read, but it takes it off of my to-do list to be the person she reads to because now she's got my dad. So it's not necessarily like you take energy from one and you just move it to the other. It's about really being creative and looking for solutions to find greater alignment between the things that you care about and how you spend your time and energy.
I love that because on the face of it, right, it's a small thing to do, and yet it has such huge impact. And one of the things that really stood out to me about the book was the way that you talked about this impulse we have to make everything into a zero-sum game, or to assume that if we focus on one area, it automatically means it's a trade-off in another area. And so really centering what you're doing around that anchor of the goals and the vision makes a lot of sense and really resonated with me, and I think would resonate with a lot of our clients, regardless of where they are in higher education. But given that it is important to develop those visions and goals, and that connection part too is really important. And how would you advise those of us in higher ed, whether we're scholars or we're staff, to approach that, particularly in light of the pandemic and the way that that's putting additional restrictions on our lives?
Right. So in the book, and the book was written pre-pandemic, we asked people to think about their lives 15 years down the road and to come up with a vision of what a better future looks like. When I started doing talks during the pandemic, I felt like I couldn't ask people to think 15 years down the road because I could barely think 15 days down the road. So instead, what I asked people to do was to think about, in the context of the pandemic, what is your vision for a life that where you're living your values and your priorities on a daily basis? So like if you could imagine next Wednesday, picking a random day, if you could really live your values next Wednesday, what would that look like? What would you do in the morning, the afternoon? What would get your attention? What would get your priorities? And you will probably never live that perfect day of balance, right? That's not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is to start to, again, be creative about envisioning what it might look like to more move closer to living your values on a regular basis, and to sort of do the creative work and the introspective work that enables you to think outside of your traditional assumptions, like you said, of this trade-off mentality, that there has to be a third way or a fourth way or a creative way that you haven't thought about yet.
There's a real element of play to that approach, right? And design thinking, which makes a topic that I think people often approach with trepidation and fear and, oh, this is going to be hard work, into something that's lighter and more fulfilling.
Exactly. And I always encourage people, as you're trying new things, the idea is to get better at coming up with creative solutions and testing them out. And that is going to include getting better at trying things that don't work and not beating yourself up over it and feeling like a total failure. One of the classic examples that I've been seeing, I've been working on this stuff for 20 years now. People come up with this idea of, if I want to have my health get better, I should wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning before the kids get up, before their responsibilities, and do like a 1 hour intense workout. And then inevitably, okay, occasionally people stick with that, but for the vast majority of us, that falls by the wayside pretty quickly, right? And the tendency is to say, well, I'm too lazy. If I could just get my act together, if I was more motivated, that would be the solution. And instead to flip that and say, okay, that experiment wasn't right. That wasn't the right experiment. I tried it. I learned. I'm a scientist and I'm investigating this. What is a different hypothesis? right? You could hypothesize that after work might work, or something that was more fun, or something that you could do with your kids, or, maybe if you had an elliptical, right? There's all kinds of creative. So I tell people, like, don't invest a ton of money in exercise equipment until you've tried out a few things. But, it's this idea of like failing fast, being creative, trying things, and then something will stick and you'll get better at this process of saying, oh, what about this? What about that? So I always encourage people to sort of be proud of the experiments that fail, because that shows that you're in this game, this process of learning about and experimenting with your own life.
No, and I think that's great, because I think that it again gets back to this issue of agency, and that it gives you something to both act on and take control of. And I guess kind of along those lines, thinking about situations where people might feel like they don't necessarily have agency, or approaching situations with some trepidation. I think something that that both Leslie and I have encountered in conversations, particularly in higher ed, particularly for caregivers, is when you have, a complex relationship with, your PI or your advisor, and there are different power dynamics at play. If you have any guidance for in those situations, how students or staff can kind of best advocate for themselves and advocate for their needs, and try out things that might fail, but are a little bit kind of scary to negotiate given different dynamics.
Yeah, so a lot of the work that I do is encouraging people to have conversations that they probably intuitively know that they need to have, but they tell themselves either I don't have time for it, or it's going to be uncomfortable and I don't want to do it. And part of leadership is dealing in reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not sticking our head in the sand and saying, if I just ignore this, it will go away. So the way that we often recommend that people broach these conversations is to think about what you want and need from the other person, and try to guess, do your best guess as to what they want and need from you. And then to go into the conversation and say, here's what I think you expect of me. What am I missing? What am I getting wrong? What am I right? Where am I over delivering? Where am I under delivering? Right? What do we need out of this? And you may hear things from people that don't feel great, right? That you aren't doing as good of a job as you thought. And then you can go back and take a second to say, they're not perfect managers or perfect PIs. Maybe they're saying something based on their own ego, their own experiences, their own issues. Just because you hear it doesn't mean you have to internalize it, but at least it gives you an understanding of where they're coming from. And it also opens the door for you to say, here's where I am, here's how things are going for me, here's what I need, here's what I expect. Where can we come together? Because we're all, especially in like virtual land, just operating on assumptions about what people are thinking and feeling and needing from us. So it's much better to check in and ask and get clarity than to just go on assuming. And that's true for work colleagues, but it's also true with the partner, right? We have these ideas of what our partner expects, wants, needs from us that may or may not be accurate. So if I think my partner and kids expect a home cooked meal from me every night, and I'm operating on that assumption, I may be spending time and energy on something that has very little value to them. And I could then question, is that how I really want to spend my energy? But if I just assume it's important, I'm going to keep devoting time and energy to that thing without really stopping to think about it. And the same thing goes, in the lab or in a research relationship or in a collaboration. You have to ask, because otherwise you don't know.
Following up on that, because I'm thinking, when there is so much fear, and when there is that perception of what the other party's expectations are, in particular in not just lab-based areas. I think that this is applicable for any of our graduate students, where their perception is that either their advisor or PI, when you think about the 4 buckets and percentages of time, and where their priorities should be. do you have any guidance if in the course of those conversations, they are finding that, their perceptions of what their PI thinks they should be doing are close to what they are close to the truth, kind of how to not push back, but how to have that conversation to communicate, okay, but my needs are this.
Yeah, so I think that if you step into their shoes, right, especially for faculty who have, shown an intense dedication to their careers, probably worked really long, very focused hours to get where they are, their mindset and their definition of success is going to be shaped very strongly by their own experiences. And you are not forced to accept their definition of success, right? You have to craft that on your own terms. And you may decide, okay, we're in the same mindset. I agree, this is the time in my life where I really do want to be, really focused on my career, my work, and meeting their expectations. And you may say that, what, I have a different definition of success. And for me, that looks like this. And they may not think that I'm their favorite grad student, and that can be okay too, right? That you don't have to play by someone else's rules. Certainly, don't get yourself fired, but, or, I don't even know what the kicked off the grant, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But, to just challenge, just because they perceive success to look one way, that doesn't mean that I have to define success in a similar way.
Yeah, and I know for a lot of clients we've worked with, and that goes for staff too, the assumptions can be something that we should approach in the same analytical manner that we do as scholars in our work. And as Elise said, sometimes it does turn out that we were right. But sometimes I know there are faculty I've worked with who were shocked to discover that their graduate students or their postdocs thought that they couldn't take vacation or that they had to stay as late as they did because they'd never had a conversation about it.
Exactly.
And as you said, the faculty member was doing their thing and assuming, well, no news is good news, or even just in terms of thinking about style. I know it's been interesting to think about not only graduate students choosing a mentor, but also staff when they are interviewing for jobs, trying to think about the questions that they can already go into an interview with that might help them understand the style and the approach to work-life integration that might be more on their same level, and not just thinking about, well, this is the next step in my career path, or this is the perfect person for the kind of research questions I want to do, but thinking more holistically about that fit as well.
Right. And also just accepting that you can have a little bit of a misfit between their priorities and your priorities. When I was in graduate school, it became very clear that the definition of success was getting a tenure line teaching job at an R1 institution, right? That was the definition of success. And that's okay. And for a long time, I thought that was my definition of success as well. And, being able to step back and say, okay, that's one definition of success. What would that mean? What would that look like? And, how could I rethink, what that means to me? What would my life look like? For instance, I'm at DePaul. We're very balanced in research and teaching. What would it mean if I was at an R1? What would that look like, right? I don't have doctoral students I don't have PhD students that I mentor, but I have these executive doctorates. I get a taste of mentoring without the obligations to fund graduate students. Is that enough? Is that good, right? So, just always asking those questions of like, somebody told me this is what success looks like. Can I take a step back and determine for myself whether that works for me or not?
And I mean, you touched on that in the book too. I think that's something that really resonated with me and with conversations that I've had, again, with our students as well, is that reality check and really reminding yourself, you can't measure your success on what you are seeing colleagues and peers doing, and social media can be really rough for that because we are more aware than ever.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I don't know if you can speak a little bit particularly Now, with so much stress around, students and professionals thinking about what the next step could be, because there is so much unknown, kind of any guidance that you have for them at navigating that space and that external pressure and internal pressure.
Oh my gosh, my dog is throwing up behind me.
Work life in real time.
He's making really gross noises, but I think it's okay. I don't know if the mic caught it or not. Yeah. So what was the question? Oh, right. The job market, things are tough. Yeah. That this is not, it's not forever, right? And that some things are out of your control and that you can have different phases of your life. And for instance, I'm at a point in my career now where I'm thinking, do I want to continue to do research? Do I want to be more of a thought leader? Do I want to move to, a role where it might be more prestigious and I can make more money, right? The doors aren't closing. And a lot of people are led to believe that if you don't get that first job right out of grad school, that door is closed forever. And that's not necessarily true. And you may find later that you don't even want that door anymore. So to kind of give yourself permission to just be a little bit in the present moment, accept that this reality, especially in the pandemic, is not great for any type of job searching, but particularly, higher ed's going through some stuff right now. And this is a world for perfectionists and overachievers. So if you've gotten this far, you are probably among that group, and you have to do some work to counteract those tendencies. And I always, my audience tends to be perfectionists and overachievers because I talk to a lot of professionals in corporate organizations, and that serves us well in life. But there's times where it actually is a hindrance, and it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't mean screw it all and just forget everything, but just recognize that tendency in yourself, and that these messages that we talk to ourselves about, I should be doing this, I should be publishing as much as this person, I should be able to do it all while also having, getting a decent night's sleep, right? That those shoulds that are in our brain are not reality, and that we have the power to kind of step back and say, take them one by one and say, is this a should that I personally agree with? Or is this a should that's not serving me right now? And you can do that, on a micro level. And, I've been doing this for a long time, as I said, and I always wish that the shoulds would go away. Can't I stop feeling like I should, for instance, exercise 6 days a week? Let's say that's my should, right? Well, now I have a cold. I still woke up this morning and I said, I should be exercising today because I thought I was going to, right? Even on a micro level like that, I wish I could just stop having it, but instead I have to just get really good at constantly challenging it, right? And that's the work of being sort of a functional adult in a society where we face a lot of pressure. You just kind of have to do the work. And ideally, maybe some of those shoulds would disappear, but probably not.
And that speaks back to what we started off with about those structural and societal barriers too. We obviously live in a culture that prioritizes this idea of the ideal worker and the performance, or at least the appearance of overwork. And one of the things too that really resonated with me out of the book is that community is so much a part of it. So you are talking about individual agency, but you're not talking about that outside of a community of support and of people who you can vet things with or turn to. And that's been a lot harder, obviously, in this COVID period to be able to form community attachments, to be able to connect with our community. So what are some ways that people can think of really reinforcing or even starting to expand their community right now?
Right. And I think, we have to be even more proactive about creating communities that work for us, because they're not just naturally around, right? People aren't saying, join this, come here, do this. It's not natural in this moment to have that community. and it's not easy to figure it out, right? So I can give you an example from this morning. I had, as I said before we started recording, my son's parent-teacher conference, and I want the teacher to organize some activities for Wednesday afternoons when the kids don't have school, because don't even ask me why they don't have school on Wednesdays. But she's not going to do it. That's out of the bounds of her job description. So I have to then decide, do I want to take charge of building this community or not? Haven't figured that out yet, because obviously it's going to take time and energy to organize like a kids anime community that for my son, right? So I have to think about that. But there's other ones that I'm like, okay, can I, pop into this community? I just got back in touch with my summer camp friends that I haven't talked to in 15 years. We were all texting last night. And that's a community that, who would have guessed? But somebody took the initiative. I wish that the communities would come to me, but it doesn't always work like that. So being proactive about thinking about, what type of community do I want and need right now? Is it a book club? Is it a text chain? Is it a live Zoom? Is it an outdoor meeting? What communities do I need to feel good? What communities do the people around me need in order to, have what they need? And just being a little bit more proactive about it, and kind of like thinking of yourself like, okay, you got to be the social chairperson sometimes, to have what you need. And that's the world we live in this moment, I think.
Thank you. And it's a lot of knowing yourself, as you said, too, and doing that work of self-reflection and honesty.
Yeah, exactly. And then, being a little bit vulnerable too, to say to, a friend, hey, what if we did this? They may say, no, I'm not comfortable with that, being, in this physical space because of the pandemic, or I'm too busy, right? Like there's a little bit of vulnerability to being the person who initiates. So thinking of it as a brave thing, and also doing something for others, right? If you are the one who takes that step and says, you know what, let's all get on Zoom and write together on Monday nights, because I need some accountability and it would be nice if we were all there, right? Taking the step to be that person, it's also a gift to others that you can think of in a really positive way, that will hopefully, come back in the future as well.
And I love the idea of the writing with others right now too, because I think that this is such an isolating moment. And being creative and thinking through, well, I'm not going to be able to go to a coffee shop and write with friends and be productive in that way, but my productivity is definitely taking a hit right now. So kind of thinking outside the box and figuring out, how can I create virtual spaces that aren't going to be the same as in person?
Yeah. We meet here, we turn off our cameras and put ourselves on mute, and every 30 minutes we check back in, right? That's easy, and I would feel great about having some writing accountability right now. So if somebody wants to Zoom with me, let me know.
Well, Alyssa, it's been such a pleasure. We just have one final question.
Yes.
When you look back, what do you wish that you could say to yourself back in graduate school or later as a tenure track faculty member about being successful professionally, having a full life, and fulfilling those or getting those 4-way wins?
Yeah, I think, I would just remind myself that everybody can kind of find their own path to success, and that includes me. And also that there's times and seasons for caring about different things and prioritizing different things, and that you can shift what your priorities are in the moment without feeling like, okay, if I take a step back from one part of my life, it's going to disappear forever. Right? It'll be there waiting for you. And you can sort of have a little bit of flexibility and fun, and recognize that no one phase is forever.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's really important for everybody to keep in mind, especially right now.
For sure. Yes.
Well, we cannot thank you enough for taking the time this morning. We're just thrilled again to have had this conversation, and thank you everybody who was able to tune in live, and we are looking forward to our next episode in season 2. And Alyssa, I hope that that your puppy's feeling better.
Yeah.
He looks okay.
Yeah, he's taking a nap again.
Yeah, so and people can reach out to me. Again, Alyssa Westring. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter, and people could also email me at awestrin. There's no G on my email at depaul.edu, and buy the book Parents Who Lead.
And we will have, oh, go ahead, Leslie.
Yes, for those of you who would be interested in forming a book club with Parents Who Lead, whether you're staff, you're faculty, you're postdocs, or you are graduate students, let us know. Alyssa has very kindly offered to provide some discussion questions and even to pop in for a discussion. So I'll get in touch with us and let us know, and we will make that happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.